To the webinar, Reducing Law Enforcement Injuries. My name is Dr. Barry Carlin, and I am the President and the Technical Developer of the Systems and Best Performance Systems. Best Performance Systems is a consulting and training company that develops customized programs to reduce injuries and improve performance. We have a division devoted to law enforcement. In today's webinar, you're going to leave this webinar with a clear understanding of exactly why virtually every law enforcement agency in the country has a multi-million-dollar work comp problem. You're going to understand exactly what causes it, exactly what action you can take to predictably prevent it, and most of you will be shocked at how obvious the cause is and how simple it is to correct it. I promise every one of you will leave feeling this was an excellent use of your time. The most important thing is not just the skills you're going to learn to influence your officers' behavior, but to influence them to actually change to new, safer, and more efficient habits. So let's get started. Would it be beneficial to you, to your department, to your officers, and to your city if you could reduce injuries predictably 40 to 80%? And reduce both medical work comp costs and disability costs? For those injuries that do occur, if they were much less severe, and if you significantly reduce both your temporary and permanent disability, a tremendous problem in law enforcement across the country. If you could reduce work comp fraud. I began my career as a treating doctor, and my practice was primarily law enforcement officers. We've worked with unions and individual officers. We've worked with internal affairs in investigating fraud. And what we found was virtually across the board that those injuries that were fraudulent was an officer that had significant discomfort already. The officer doesn't wake up feeling great and say, I think I'll report a fraudulent injury today. It's the officer that has chronic pain. It's an exacerbation of an existing injury. If you could significantly get your entire department feeling better, that alone has been proven to significantly reduce fraudulent injuries. How about unnecessary escalation to deadly force? If you have a police officer, when he goes to the lake, he has to ask somebody else to lift the ice chest out of the truck because he's afraid his back's going to go out, and actually a common situation, how is that same officer going to be when he's at work and he's suddenly confronted with a suspect who he believes is about to have a physical encounter with, who's more fit and larger than he is? If he's not fit enough to handle the altercation, that will often influence him to handle it the only way he can, which is with deadly force. So feeling better is going to reduce that escalation. The most difficult one of all, how would it benefit you if you could actually get your officers to willingly change to safer and more efficient work habits? Today's presentation will present the primary cause of 80% of law enforcement injuries, 80% of the medical costs and disability, and the solution. Today we're going to focus primarily on the patrol officer who wears a utility belt and spends time in a vehicle. If you have any questions, please email them to me. Or if you want to request assistance for your department, we're happy to help you. And if you have any good ideas you want to share, or if you have any specific requests for future subjects which we cover in these webinars, anything that you email to me at barry@bestperformancesystems.com will be answered the latest by the following day. Also, replays of this training can be made available if you request them for your colleagues or to use for training for example, at a staff roll call. So what is our objective today? Simple, to learn the components of a law enforcement specific system that will stimulate and maintain habits in your workforce that will predictably, at 100% of the time, improve performance and reduce and virtually eliminate injuries. Who am I? I began my career as a treating doctor. and my practice was largely law enforcement. It was based in Santa Monica, California, in the vicinity of Los Angeles. So we were working with the Los Angeles Police Department, California Highway Patrol, Los Angeles Sheriff's Department. Interestingly, the other half of my practice was primarily performing artists, dancers, musicians. Because of our proximity to Hollywood, sword fighters, stunt people, even circus performers. And the work we did with those performing artists, because of the specific things they did, involved exercise to treat their injuries specific for what they do. Not only did we find that we were rehabilitating the injuries, but we were shocked to learn that we were preventing future injuries and improving their performance. We've taken these concepts that we've learned and we now apply them to workers and to law enforcement officers. We then expanded to treating injured workers strictly for employers and insurance companies. And now, since 1992, we've been dedicated to improving conditions in the workplace, working with, for example, police departments on improving conditions. So why am I qualified to present to law enforcement professionals? We've had 100% success since 1995. Our average injury reduction is 40 to 90%, and we have an entire division devoted to law enforcement. I've been a speaker on this subject to the California Police Chiefs Association, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and I just came back 2 weeks ago from Little Rock, Arkansas, where I presented this similar information to NOBLE, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. You may not agree with everything you hear today initially. I ask you to please keep an open mind and remember, this system has had 100% success and has saved many organizations millions of dollars, some tens of millions of dollars. Let's get to work. There's unique issues in law enforcement. The law enforcement professional must survive in an environment with potential risk and danger. They must plan for traumatic situations, or most of you plan for traumatic situations, which are the clear and present danger. Dealing in an altercation with a suspect, auto accidents, dealing with people who are holding a weapon in their hand. These are the obvious risks. But we now know the greatest source of chronic pain and disabling traumatic injury in law enforcement is cumulative stress built up on a daily basis by the law enforcement officer from years from inappropriate use of equipment. For example, something we'll be covering today, the officer must wear the utility belt or the Sam Browne. If they don't have the equipment on this belt customized to their body type and to their, let's say, pre-existing injuries, that's going to create cumulative stress in their body, which will build up day by day and cause pain and make them prone to a serious injury. Incorrect working technique. We have seen hundreds of times police officers who frequently must deal with something on the ground, such as a suspect, during an apprehension, during containment, while they're performing a search. How about when the officer is picking up a suspect in handcuffs to put him in the vehicle? In general, what we have observed is the officer stands with their feet close together and they bend over and use their back to do the lifting. This working technique creates tremendous stress, and we'll share today a simple technique to prevent that stress. And how about prolonged poor posture contributing to cumulative trauma? Simply improperly sitting in the vehicle or sitting at your desk while you're doing your reports. These are sources of your cumulative stress that builds up over time. Now, most traumatic injuries that occur in a police officer occur doing some activity the officer has done hundreds, maybe thousands of times before. And the exertion which caused the injury may be a minor exertion, something they've done so many times before. Why did injury occur that day? Here's the answer. It was years of symptom-free cumulative trauma that broke down tissues and made them fragile. For example, imagine I had a plastic pen in my hand, and I bent it so it was slightly curving. Now I bend it again, no problem. I bend it 10 times, 100 times, no problem. What will happen if I bend that pen the same way thousands of times, 10,000 times, 50,000 times, what will happen eventually? I can hear you coming through the webinar lines. Exactly. The pen is going to eventually break. It's the same innocent stress every time, but each time it's done, there's microfracture of plastic fibers in the pen. And eventually, multiple innocent stresses build up and the pen snaps. The exact same thing occurs in the officer's body, even though it may be symptom-free if they use bad technique. There's also a unique situation in the course of police work, which we'll be discussing today, that temporarily leaves them prone to a sudden, severe, permanent injury. And this, which we'll be presenting in a few minutes, is the major multi-million-dollar problem for law enforcement. Now, this may not be a surprise to you, but you've got a higher percentage than most industries on temporary and permanent disability. 80% of police officers report they suffer with chronic pain and decreased quality of life. This chronic pain not only affects them at work, but affects them in sports, their social life, even their ability to have a good night's sleep. And organizations are spending millions of dollars in work comp and disability costs. And you want to know something? This is completely preventable. Let's share how. The officers can be influenced to change to the best possible habits. You've got an opportunity to take action. But what is everyone doing right now? You're retroactive. You're responding to injuries after they have occurred. You're dealing with the injured officer. You're handling the work comp claim. You're handling the disability. You're trying to get them off modified work and back to normal duties again. You're responding to the injury. What we influence the department to do, and what we're sharing with you today, is to be proactive to prevent the injury from occurring in the first place. And it's simple. Let's deal with the first problem. 80% of police officers have chronic neck pain, have headaches, mostly at the base of the skull, and they have arm pain. Many of you also have tingling and numbness and an ache traveling down the arm. Many of you even have a lack of coordination and a weakness in your hand, which obviously is going to affect you. Now, writing a ticket, working on the computer in your vehicle, sitting at the desk of the station house. What do all these jobs have in common that affect the police officer? These activities involve the neck being in flexion. You're bent forward. And what happens when you're bending forward? It results in muscle tension and disc distortion in the neck. Now, what does the head weigh? The average head weighs 8 to 10 pounds. For those of you out there that are sergeants and above, it could be 15 or 17 pounds. Some say it's because there's more brains packed into the skull. Some say it's something about the thickness of the skull. But your head weighs as much as a bowling ball. Now, let's talk about the development of muscle tension. If I put my elbow, now imagine this. I put my elbow on a desk and my hand was straight up. I put a bowling ball in my hand, and my hand, it's balanced directly over my arm. That's not difficult. I could sit there as long as it's balanced directly above the arm and talk to you for a few minutes. But if I was to bend my wrist 45 degrees so the bowling ball that I'm holding is off to the side, what would then happen? I'd be shaking within 5 or 10 seconds. I'd probably be down in 30 to 60 seconds, and my arm would be sore by tomorrow. Because the head is off center, the muscles in the back of the neck and the upper back are holding it up. They become more and more tense. How about disc distortion? The spine is a bunch of bones called the vertebra. In between the vertebrae are discs. When you look down, the disc is being pushed towards the rear. I'll show you this in a picture in a couple of minutes. When the disc is pushed towards the rear, it touches the nerves and causes pain. So, the neck looking down in the police officer is the cause of muscle tension and disc distortion, both of which cause pain. What's the solution for the neck pain in law enforcement? It's simple. It's a two-step. Step one, self-diagnose and treat and get relief, and it takes 5 seconds. I'm showing it to you in 5 seconds. 2, correct the ergonomics of the job task so you minimize flexion. which we'll be sharing with you in just a moment. These are two of the stretches that we provide to law enforcement officers. When we train them, part of what we do is we give every officer a card with stretches, and we teach them these stretches, and it's all based on instant gratification. So humor me and let me take you through the stretch the same way that we do it with your police officers. And I guarantee in the next 60 seconds or so, every one of you observing this webinar is going to feel a little bit better. First, you want to self-diagnose where the tension is. Sit up straight. I want you to tilt your neck to your right. And now I want you to go forward and bend to your right. Come back and go to the middle and bend to your right. Go back a little further and bend to your right. Whichever of those three positions cause more tension on the left, I want you all to go to it and hold it for 3 relaxing breaths. If I could see you all, some of you would be forward, some of you would be to the middle, some of you would be at the back right now. Every one of you just diagnosed exactly where the tension is in your neck, and now you're getting therapy and fixing it. It's probably been 3 breaths. Go to the other side and self-diagnose. Go forward to your left, the middle, and back. Go to the position which is tight and hold it for 3 relaxing breaths, and then look up. I venture to say that if I could see you and ask you to raise your hand, who here felt that they were tense more in the middle or the front on one side and maybe on the back of the other side? In other words, it was different positions from side to side. 80 to 90% of the room would say yes. That means all of those people discovered that the muscles were tense in the neck and the front on one side and the back on the other side. Isn't it logical? If you can find the exact sites of tension and then reduce that tension, you're going to feel better. We teach the officers to be empowered to diagnose where their tension is. If they have neck discomfort and it was caused by muscle tension, this will take away their pain instantly. The rest of that stretching routine is going forward, forward to the right, forward to the left, hold the tight spot for 3 relaxing breaths, and then you're going back, back to the right and back to the left. Hold the tight spot for 3 relaxing breaths. That's a complete stretching routine for the neck to self-diagnose where the tension is, then get rid of it, which can be performed, for example, at a red light or at a stop right before you get out of the car when you're sitting in the vehicle. Disc distortion. Some of you are going to be amazed at what you experience and feel in the next 60 seconds. I'd like everyone to please sit in your chair, and I want you to rotate your neck, but don't twist your shoulders or your body at all. Just turn your head only to your right as far as you can, and look and see where the last landmark is you can see behind you. Then go to the other side, rotate, and again look and see on this side where the last landmark is that you can see behind you. See how much tension you have in your neck, how far you can go. Now look forward, you're going to do a correction of any disc distortion if you have it. As the purple picture shows, don't look up, don't look down. Look straight ahead and pull your neck back like you're making double chins. Then push in on your chin. Your neck's like a wet noodle. And hold that for 3 deep breaths. I know it looks silly, but humor me and do this because you're going to be shocked at the benefit you're about to experience. There's your 3 breaths. Now, the same way you did before, look over your right shoulder. Look at the landmark compared to before. Feel how far your neck can go. Go to the other side. If I asked you to raise your hand, 80 to 90% of you would say you can see farther. This movement does not decrease muscle tension. This is actually a self-manipulation of if there was bulging disc in the neck. If you had a certain range of motion, did this movement, then you had more range of motion, which most of you listening to this webinar had, you had a bulging disc and you just put it back in place. Now, which one should you do, the neck stretching routine or this chin tuck, which you just did? Whichever one takes away your pain. If your neck discomfort was being caused by muscle tension, the neck stretch will make you feel better. If your neck discomfort was being caused by the disc bulge, this chin tuck will make you feel better. It's as simple as that. Police officers tell us they've had chronic neck pain for years. They've been going to doctors. They've been going to chiropractors. They've been taking drugs. They've been suffering with pain. And just doing these couple of little 3-second exercises a few times per day, it's 100% eliminated. So here's how you treat the pathology from looking down. Let's talk about preventing it in the first place. Here's those same three situations. Now here's what we've learned from other police officers that will work. The gentleman writing the ticket in the upper left-hand corner, he's got to look down. Working with hundreds, maybe thousands of police officers, the ideas we came up with in this situation is if you hold what you're looking at right next to your belly, you're looking down significantly. If you simply hold it 6 to 10 inches away, your eyes will then share the task of looking down. You won't bend your neck as much. So that's one solution. Another solution, stand back a bit from the person in the vehicle, and maybe even a little bit to the back of the car, to the back seat of the car. You're still facing the suspect, so the person in the car, so you can watch them, but you can then rest your hand on the roof of the car. Again, that's ergonomically a way to not look down as much. Then let's look at the gentleman working with the computer in his vehicle. There's no way for him to change it. So what he would do, since he's looking down and to the right, is every couple of minutes simply look up and to the left for a few moments and then go back to work again. Instead of having constant building up stress in his neck, he's periodically reducing it so he doesn't have as much stress. And finally, look at the person who's working in the office. Anyone who's listening to this webinar, I mentioned to you a moment ago that we have a laminated card that we give the police officers and all the stretches. If you email us, we will mail you a copy of that card, and on the back of it, it shows how anyone can instantly customize their computer workstation. You as police officers spend a tremendous amount of time sitting at a computer working on your reports. Whether you're 5'5" or 6'2", you can instantly adjust the workstation to be ergonomically correct and less stressful to your body, and that's laid out on the back of the card behind the stretches. Please contact us after this webinar via email, and we'll send a copy of that to you. And finally, you've got built-up stress. Many police officers have found a way to reduce that stress. This gentleman has found a way to reduce his stress. Okay. Most injuries and chronic painful conditions leave the officer uncomfortable but capable of functioning. A low back spinal injury renders anybody, it renders the officer helpless and unable to discharge their duties in an emergency. Fact: if a suspect resists as force escalates, if the officer or the public is threatened with death or serious harm, the officer may use deadly force to retain custody. Fact: if the officer has chronic pain or an unstable low back, which they know may go out during an exertion, they are likely or sometimes forced to resort to deadly force to control a situation long before an officer who is fit and healthy with a stable low back. Fact: Parker versus District of Columbia in 1988. An unfit officer was not physically able to effect an arrest. He resorted to the use of deadly force. An officer who he was not extremely fit, he was a little overweight, and he had an unstable low back, made a traffic stop. The gentleman he stopped was coming from the gym. He was wearing gym clothes. He was a big, physically fit man. He happened to be a litigating lawyer with an aggressive personality. He was unhappy that he was stopped for a traffic stop, and he gets out of the car and in a very aggressive manner starts walking back towards a police officer, reaching into his clothing for his identification. The police officer, believing he was about to be involved in a physical altercation with somebody far more fit than he was and larger than he was, did not think he'd be capable of handling it without his back going out. He pulled his weapon and discharged it. The man lived, and the man sued the city of Washington, D.C., calling the police officer as a witness. Calling the police officer as a witness. The court found the city negligent due to a pattern of indifference to the fitness and health of the officer, and there was a multi-million-dollar judgment against the city. completely preventable. If you do training and influence your officers to do whatever it takes to feel better and have a more stable spine. Simple to do. There was a police officer injury study by Thomas Bullock, who's a law enforcement specialist at VML Insurance. He found, looking at the average cause of injuries over a 4-year period, 2001 to 2005, he found a number of injuries were from training activities, walking, office work. But here, this is significant. Sitting in a vehicle, 10.1% of all injuries. Foot pursuit, 10.3%. Arresting a subject, 23%. Searching, 6.1%. Those last 4 things we look at as one single entity. Sitting in a vehicle, being involved in a pursuit, being involved in apprehension, being involved in the search. That was 49.5% of all injuries from this one situation. Here is the most common cause of permanent, life-altering, low back pain disability in police officers. And this, we're now going to give you a specific problem and a specific solution. The officers often sit in a vehicle. There is severe spinal stress from the utility belt improperly adjusted to that officer, and frequently the asymmetrical condition of the seats in the vehicle. The stressful sitting makes the low back, disc, and muscles temporarily extremely fragile. The vehicle is sometimes exited with an immediate exertion, lifting barricades, pulling the tactical bag out of the trunk, being involved in a rescue after a motor vehicle accident, a chase and an apprehension, an exertion directly after this prolonged, stressful sitting. The otherwise safe exertion will then cause a severe spinal injury because the back was temporarily fragile from stressful sitting. A disc injury in the low back of a police officer is easily a $100,000 injury. If there's permanent disability, which is common, we're looking at a multi-million-dollar injury to the department over the lifetime of that police officer. Here's why. Here's a normal spine. If there was a head on top of that, it would be looking to the left. Those are the normal curves of the spine. The neck goes forward, upper back goes back, low back goes forward, pelvis goes back. If you maintain all of these normal curves in the spine, the discs stay in place, the muscles are relaxed, the joints are non-inflamed. But what happens from stressful sitting? This picture is showing the red things are vertebrae. The gray things between the vertebrae are discs. The yellow thing behind the spine, behind the vertebra disc, is the spinal cord. And as you can see from sitting improperly, the disc can bulge back, touching the nerve, causing pain, or just from the fact you were sitting improperly, it bulges back, and until it goes back in again, it's extremely fragile and it can break and burst. This picture is showing 2 discs, a healthy one and the typical one in a law enforcement officer with low back pain. The blue thing is a disc. The light blue thing in the center is a gelatinous center. The dark blue line around it, circle around it, are thousands and thousands of fibrous rings that hold it in place. And this moves around so the spine has motion. Every time you do something improperly, remember that cumulative trauma with the pen? Every time you bend improperly, every time you sit improperly, there's potentially a microfracture of some of these little rings. It could take years for enough breakdown to occur, but eventually enough breakdown occurs from these symptom-free bad habits that, as you see in the picture on the right, there's a weak spot in the wall, and it bulges out and it touches the nerve. That's what causes the pain in the low back, sometimes shooting down the leg. And worst case scenario, here's 2 more discs. You see on the left, the normal disc, the jelly's in the center with the rings around it. On the right, it broke all the way through. This causes significant pain, possibly loss of control of bowels and bladder, and the only solution is going to be surgery. And that disc is unstable, and this officer is no longer able to do the physical activities he was able to do before the injury. Once it occurs, you're disabled. Simple to correct, simple to prevent, rather. The solution: customize the utility belt in the vehicle, which I'm about to show you. The officer learns to self-diagnose and self-treat the low back with simple 3-breath stretches, which they will instantly reduce pain, improve strength and performance, and reduce chance of injury. It's done in 3 breaths, sitting in the vehicle, for example. The officer learns to apply all of their current techniques of apprehension, containment, lifting, pushing, pulling, with ergonomic concepts, basically martial arts concepts, so there's less stress in their body during the activities required of the police officer. And finally, and the biggest one of all, you must have a way to influence the officer to actually change their behavior, to actually use safer and more efficient techniques to perform these activities, which take seconds and they do while they're working. It's done with behavior modification training and accelerated learning, much of which we'll share with you in these webinars. So let's start with customizing the utility belt in the vehicle. A great deal of time is spent by many officers in the vehicle. First problem: asymmetrical equipment on the belt. If you have asymmetrical equipment, which is pushing on your back as you're sitting, it's going to cause low back muscle spasm, disc distortion, and joint inflammation when sitting. The exact situation we showed you earlier. We influence the officers, or you need to influence your officers, to set up their equipment symmetrically so it'll maintain a healthy low back curve. What we do with most of our departments is one of the easiest things is to have 2 single handcuff cases set symmetrically in the low back, as you see in this police officer. Now, something else that we found very successful is we'll take a piece of dense foam, or the officer will take a piece of dense foam, about a 1/2 inch thick. They'll cut it to fit their equipment and belt. So in this case, they would cut it the shape of the 2 single handcuff cases and the belt between the 2 handcuff cases. Now, the Sam Browne is not only not causing as much stress in the low back, but when you're sitting, it actually functions as a orthopedic low back support. We've had police officers tell us that they've had a knife in their back for years, and just sitting with low back support to maintain that curve, within 1 day takes the knife out of their low back. Fact. Holsters are a tremendous problem. Here's what it is. The fixed holster is the most commonly used. Based on the officer's body type and the size and length of the weapon, when sitting, the barrel may press into the seat. So the officer who is tall or short, or has a large buttocks, or has a high-waisted body type or a low-waisted body type, that will affect if the barrel is pushing into the seat. And in this situation, the pelvis is being pushed up on one side by the weapon pushing into the seat. This tilts the pelvis, causing extreme low back spine, muscle, and disc stress. In other words, if the pelvis is tilted up on one side, you're going to have muscles contracting to hold you stable over your center of gravity. If it's tilted up on one side, the disc is being pushed out to one side. The solution? The goal of a holster which does not allow the weapon to push into the seat, which then tilts the pelvis. In this picture, you see a low-positioned fixed holster. What we'll recommend in that situation is a fixed holster which sits instead higher. How high does it need to go? And there's a multitude of holster options available. It simply needs to be high enough that it's not pushing into the seat when you sit. Now, when we first began doing law enforcement programs, we also recommended swivel and floppy holsters. Safariland and Hoyt make that style that won't pop off going over a fence or won't jiggle when running, but we find that police officers no longer are interested in using the swivel or the floppy holster, so it's almost always a fixed holster. If the department allows it, the tactical holster, which sits lower and is attached to the lateral thigh, is very effective also. So solution 1, make sure that your Sam Browne is symmetrical. Solution 2, make sure that the gun is not pressing into the seat when you sit. Now, if you change the holster style, you then have to go through training to make sure the officer goes through training to practice and protect their weapon. and to effectively draw, because it's much higher now. When they reach it, their elbow is going to be higher. This will also apply if you change your weapon, because these are modern times and we sometimes evolve into new weaponry. Mr. Spock had a very similar problem. All right, let's talk about your vehicle now. Look at this young lady. She's sitting without low back support. She's sitting, and this is how most of your officers sit in the vehicle. No low back support, and they just slump. The low back has got a reverse curve. Muscles are tensing up. The discs are being pushed to the rear. And just from sitting with this slump posture, you see how the head and neck are forward. The bowling ball weight head is now being held up by the muscles in the back of the neck and the upper back. Simply supporting the low back, the only change we made here was putting something in the curve of her low back. We didn't tell her to sit up straight. Just put something in the curve of her low back. The low back curve is now normal, which means the discs are in place, the muscles are relaxed. The head's above the body, which means there's no tension and disc distortion from the head being forward in the neck and shoulders. Somebody with this low back pillow, they'll tell us they feel better the very first shift they use it. Now, how do you place that? To place the low back, sit all the way back. Arch your back and reach back and feel where the deepest part of your curve is. That's where the support is placed. And this can vary. If you have a hard weekend doing yard work, playing volleyball, lifting heavy chests of soft drinks, of course, at the lake, your back may be strained. That's going to change where the deepest part of your curve is. If you have a relaxing weekend at a spa, then again, that's going to change the position of the deepest part of your curve. So all the officer needs to do is arch their back, reach back there, feel where the deepest point of the curve is, place the pillow there. Now, what kind of a pillow are they going to use? Here's some examples. The commercial pillows do an excellent job of supporting the low back. And here's 3 samples. Here's the problem. If you attach them into the vehicle, you can get caught up on them and they can slow down a speedy exit. Unacceptable in law enforcement. If they're unattached, when you get out and you're with an unexpected situation and you're watching a suspect, for example, you don't even realize it fell on the ground. It's dark, it's night, you don't even know it's here, you drive away and you've lost it. These things cost from $15 to $35. Who's going to pay for the replacement cost? The officer, the department? Nobody wants to. So we found an excellent solution for law enforcement. Simply use a towel. You can roll the towel. If it falls, you've littered, and it's easy and inexpensive to replace. And also, if you're not able to make your Sam Browne completely symmetrical because of all the equipment that you have, you can fold it to compensate for asymmetry in the back of your Sam Browne, of your utility belt. So now, again, you just simply use a towel to create a custom low back support so you're sitting comfortably. Look at the picture on the left. These foam pillows, we've had police officers over the years, they like the foam pillows better. They open in the back. They would pop out the foam, and they would cut out the foam to match their equipment in the back. They've now made a pillow which is custom made for their particular way of wearing their Sam Browne. Another point, by the way, is make sure that your officers, once they have their belt set up properly for them, make sure they appropriately use stays to keep the equipment in place. Many police officers we have found will set things up properly, but if with improperly placed or they don't use stays, the equipment shifts around during their shift, and it winds up starting off properly, but then it winds up creating stress by the end. So once it's set right, set them so they don't move with stays. Another solution with the belt we've learned recently is many officers like a belt which is available easily in any supply store for law enforcement called the AccuMold Elite. It looks identical to the standard leather belt, but it's made of a laminate and it's 50% lighter, and it molds and it conforms more to the officer's body. The AccuMold Elite belt. It's less expensive than leather. easier to maintain, and much more comfortable for the officer. Anything that can be done to make the officer more comfortable is going to make him or her more effective. Let's talk about your vehicle now. Here's a reality we find all across the country. Because the vehicles, sometimes they're old, and because they have such constant use, the seats are broken down and uneven. We have police officers complain to us on a daily basis that the car which they're driving gives them a backache. Simple. And this uneven seat thing creates a low back stress. Simple solution: take another towel, fold it to compensate for that unevenness. So take a towel with you on your shift. Once you get to your seat, simply sit in it and then fold the towel so that you'll wind up having a level seat to sit on. That alone will reduce backache, back stress, and the tendency to injury the very first shift you use it. So that was several things that can be done to customize the utility belt and the vehicle. Now, the second part of the solution: the officers learn to self-diagnose and self-treat their low back with a 3-breath stretch, which instantly reduces pain, improves strength and performance, reduces chance of injury. This is similar to what we did earlier for the neck. There's 2 things that will cause fragility and pain in the low back of a police officer: muscle tension and disc distortion. To get rid of muscle tension, the officer sitting in the vehicle or in their station will simply sit and pull the knee up to the chest. This can be done easily around the steering wheel. Try it right now. Pull your knee up to your chest. Pull your left knee up towards your chest. Take the knee to the outside and pull it in. Go back to the center and pull it in. Go across towards the right leg and pull it in. You're going to feel tension. It could be in your thigh, your buttocks, or your low back. One of those positions, I guarantee, is more tense than the others. Hold that position for 3 breaths. Then you do the same thing for the other leg. If the police officer had back discomfort in any way caused by muscle tension, this will instantly relieve it. Now, the other problem, disc distortion. Here's a simple movement that will put the disc in place if it is distorted. You simply, whether it's sitting or standing, you put your hands in your low back and push forward and stick your chest up in the air. Try that right now. Many of you listening to this webinar, by doing this for 3 breaths, are going to instantly have your back feeling better. These are 2 movements that we teach the police officer to do while they're sitting in their vehicle. Which one should they do? The knee pull or the back extension? It's pretty simple. They should do the one that makes them feel better after they've done it. If their back discomfort was being caused by muscle tension, the knee pull will make them feel better. If their back discomfort was being caused by disc distortion, the back extension movement, pushing in on the low back, will make them feel better. Or they might go back and forth throughout the day. 1 hour do the knee pull, and the next hour do the back extension. What we always do when we train a department, we actually put these stretches up on the visor to remind them to do it. And again, please feel free to contact us via email, and we'll send you a sample of one of these cards. The next part, 2 parts of the solution, are the officers will learn to apply the various current techniques of apprehension, containment, lifting, pushing and pulling with ergonomic concepts, and also techniques to influence the workers, the officers, to actually apply these techniques. Because of the size of this subject, we're going to do this in a second webinar, which will be within 2 weeks. If you register for this webinar, you will be contacted within a few days to be told when that webinar will be, and you'll be sent the link to sign up for it. But let me show you a little bit of what we're doing. This officer performing a search of the suspect, take a look at him. Where does he feel stress in his body right now? Obviously, it's going to be in his low back. There's a second danger here. So he's in danger of creating cumulative trauma stress to his low back. There's a second danger. If that suspect suddenly resists and pushes back, the officer's feet are positioned such that he could be knocked off his feet. So before he could gain control of the suspect who's resisting, he'd have to reposition his feet so he's stable. The solution that we teach every time, always have one foot back. Now, I'd like you all to stand up. Everybody stand up who's listening to this webinar. Put your feet next to each other and reach forward as if you're bending down to search this suspect. Where do you feel the stress? In your low back. Okay, now stand up, and I want you to put 1 foot forward and 1 foot back. Bend your knees a little bit and bend forward the same way. You don't feel it in your low back at all, do you? So every time you're going to be bending forward, always use a staggered stance with one leg back. Now take a look at the same picture on the right. If that suspect was to suddenly resist and push back, the officer's foot is already towards the rear. He's already in a stable position to handle that altercation. So not only is this officer going to be protecting his low back by having 1 foot back, but he's also going to be in a position to maintain control of the suspect. Let's look at this picture. That officer is having to control the suspect by pushing on his low back. Look where the officer's feet are. Now you tell me, where does that officer feel stress? Obviously, he's going to be feeling it in his low back. And the power in his arm, which is holding that suspect against the wall to maintain control of the suspect, where's that power coming from? It's coming from his shoulder, his arm, and his low back. Now, what would happen if that officer had 1 foot back? Instantly, 85% of the power which he's applying with his arm would be coming from that rear leg. He'd have much more power with much less effort in his body being applied to the suspect to control him, and then he would not be bending his back. When you bend forward with one leg back, you actually bend where the leg joins the pelvis. You don't bend with the low back. So there's a taste of the type of things that we'll be sharing on the next webinar on how to use technique to minimize the stress for the officer. Police officers are under a tremendous amount of physical stress, not just from the altercations and the clear and present danger, the traumatic injuries, but from the equipment they wear and the postures they maintain during the various aspects of their activity. They're simple to solve. The big key is how you train your officers to do these things so the officer who's been working for 20 years, who's got an attitude that he knows everything, so he's receptive. It's done by behavior modification training, which will also be covered in the next webinar. If you have any questions, please email them to me at barry@bestperformancesystems.com. If you have any good ideas you want to share with law enforcement in general, we have the ear of the law enforcement industry. If you have any specific requests for things that we'd like to cover in the future, please email us. And if you would like us to assist you with anything that you're doing in your department, feel free to contact us, and I or one of my staff members will get back to you, and we're happy to give you any advice over the telephone or over email. We will answer your questions the latest by the following day. If you register for this webinar, you will be notified when Part 2 is, and you'll be sent the link to register, as well as any future replays of the training you just saw. This will be replayed again. We're recording it. If you would like private replays of this training for colleagues, or if you'd like to use it for training, for example, at your roll call, to train some of your officers to give them an idea of things they could do, feel free to contact us, and we'll be happy to arrange for a private replay for your department. And finally, if you would like to discuss our providing a program for your department, and again, remember, we've had 100% success at reducing injuries in law enforcement, and we average a 40 to 90% reduction in injuries. Please feel free to contact us. We'd be happy to talk to you. In many situations, depending upon the department in your city, we're able to provide our program at no cost. We simply take a percentage of actual savings that you experience. and you're already doing the record keeping for this, because every department keeps a federal OSHA 300 log, which lists the details of all your injuries and their costs. I hope this webinar was practical and was useful to you. I hope you learned some things you'll be able to apply to yourself and to your department right away. And we hope to speak to you again, with you again, and possibly to work together. Thank you very much for sharing your valuable time with us. And this is Dr. Barry Carlin from Best Performance Systems signing off.